I want you to imagine something for a moment. Imagine you wake up tomorrow morning and you want breakfast and a robot makes it for you. And then you need transport and an autonomous vehicle just arrives at your door. And then you need a new laptop and AI designs it, a factory of robots builds it, and then a drone delivers it. And you don't speak to a single human being. You didn't need to work for it, and the cost was so low that it was almost irrelevant. Now that might sound a little bit like science fiction, but some of the brightest minds on the planet, the smartest people in technology, believe that we're moving towards a world that looks something just like this. Elon Musk recently spoke about a future where AI and robotics create so much abundance that money might become less important than it is today. Listen to this.
And I do think we'll have universal high income. We're basically just issue money to people because the output of goods and services will so far exceed the money supply that effectively you have deflation, because just deflation is just the ratio of the outputs of goods and services to the money supply. So if the rate of growth of goods and services far exceeds the rate of growth of the money supply, which I predict will happen, then you will have deflation.
What is an economy? People get confused. Sometimes they think an economy is money. Money is a database for exchange of goods and services and for time shifting the exchange of goods and services. Money doesn't have power in and of itself. If you're trapped on a remote island, shipwrecked on an island, and you've got $1 trillion in a Swiss bank account, it's worthless. You'd rather have a can of soup. The actual economy is goods and services. So then what limits the output of goods and services? That limiter is labor. It's not clear that an economy in the traditional sense has any meaning anymore, because you have no constraint on goods and services. The only things that will be missing are things that have artificial scarcity.
He basically goes on to say that there's only a limit to what humans actually know they want. So when you get to a point when you've served all and covered all bases with AI and robotics, then money truly is worthless. He referenced something called The Culture, which is a series of science fiction novels written by Ian M. Banks. And the more I thought about it, the more I realised that the conversations that he's having on these podcasts aren't really about AI. They're conversations about humanity, because if machines eventually become better than humans at almost every productive task, what exactly does happen next? What happens to jobs? What happens to wealth? What happens to trading? What happens to purpose? And perhaps the strangest question of all is, what happens when money stops being the thing that determines who gets what? So let's get stuck into this. So to understand where we might be going, we first have to understand why money exists in the first place. Most people never really think about this. Money itself isn't valuable. You can't eat it, you can't survive on it, you can't live in it, you can't wear it. Money is simply an agreement. It's a tool, a way for humans to exchange value. Thousands of years ago, if I grew potatoes and you built houses, we had a problem, because maybe I don't need a house and maybe you don't eat potatoes. So money solved that problem. It became a bridge between human effort and human needs. You work, you earn money, you exchange money for goods and services. Very, very simple. But that system depends on one very important thing, and that is human labor. Humans create value. Humans exchange value. Humans consume value. But what happens when humans are no longer required for production? Well, then that's where things start to get really, really strange. Think about the Industrial Revolution. Before machines, 100 people might be needed to produce a certain amount of output, right? Then machines arrived and suddenly 10 people could do the same work. So productivity exploded. We became wealthier. Living standards improved. Now imagine that same process happening again, but this time it's not just physical labour, it's mental labour too. AI can already write, it can analyse, it can design things, it can code, it can research, it can create images and video and music, and it's improving at a pace that's really difficult to comprehend. Now if you combine that all with robotics, machines that can physically interact with the world, and they can build and move and repair and manufacture and harvest and deliver, suddenly you're looking at a future where production becomes incredibly cheap, possibly cheaper than anything we've ever experienced. And if production becomes abundant, then scarcity starts disappearing. And scarcity is what gives things value. And this is where Elon is referencing the culture. Now, if you've never heard of it, the culture is a civilization where advanced AI systems manage almost everything. Energy is effectively unlimited, resources are abundant, and machines perform the labor. And people are basically free to pursue whatever interests them, art and science and adventure and creativity and exploration. And nobody works because they have to, they work because they want to. Now, before you dismiss that as a bit of a fantasy, think about how strange modern life would appear to someone living just 200 years ago. You carry a device in your pocket with access to information than the greatest libraries in history. You can speak instantly to someone on the other side of the planet. You can order food whilst sitting on your sofa without lifting a finger. You can learn almost any skill from your bedroom. That would have sounded absurd not that long ago. So the point is, the future really does often arrive looking impossible, but then it becomes normal. Now, one thing Elon said that really caught my attention in these interviews was this idea that the future race might be about wattage and tonnage. He mentioned power and energy and resources. Because if AI and robotics become the engines of production, then the limiting factor won't be labor, it will be energy. Think about that. Today we talk about money. In the future, all of the nations across the world will compete primarily on who can generate the most electricity, who has the most computing power, who has the most manufacturing capability, who controls the most resources, because those things become the foundation of abundance. The wealthiest nations might not be the nation with the most money. It might be the nation with the most energy. Now let's push this idea a little bit further. Imagine every citizen receives access to food, housing, healthcare, education, transport, connectivity, an AI assistant, not because they're got loads of money or they're wealthy, but because the cost of providing those things has become so incredibly low. Now, suddenly money starts behaving differently because you're no longer using the money to survive. You're using it to differentiate, to personalize, to experience. And that's a very, very different economic system. Here's another thought experiment. Imagine you want a new dining table, right? Today, someone designs it, someone manufactures it, someone transports it, somebody sells it, and everybody takes a cut. In the future, you describe the table you want to your AI assistant. The AI designs it, a robotic factory manufactures it, an autonomous vehicle delivers it with no human intervention. The total cost would approach zero. What exactly are you paying for? What's being exchanged? What is the economic value? And these questions sound simple, but they become incredibly difficult once abundance enters the picture. So now let's bring this back to trading. Because some people watching this are probably wondering, what does any of this have to do with markets? Well, potentially everything, because markets exist because resources are scarce. Investors allocate capital, businesses compete, prices fluctuate, supply and demand determine value. But in a future dominated by AI, entire industries could change dramatically. Energy will become critical, semiconductors become critical, data centers become critical, compute becomes critical, robotic infrastructure becomes critical, and the biggest opportunities won't sit where they sit today. Future traders might spend a lot less time analyzing oil and currencies and more time analyzing AI infrastructure, compute networks, power generation, automation systems. So the landscape itself will change. But the bit that I find probably the most interesting, and honestly, I think this is the question nobody's really talking about, is what happens to purpose? Because most of human history, survival has dictated behavior. People work because they need money. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They need food, they need shelter, they need security. But if those needs become increasingly automated, then what? What gets you out of bed? What gives your life meaning? What makes one person fulfilled and another miserable? The conversations suddenly stop being about economics and become deeply personal. What do you want to become? What do you want to contribute? What kind of life do you want to create? Those questions become far more important. Look, I don't know exactly how this future unfolds. Nobody does. But maybe it takes 20 years. Maybe it takes 50 years. Maybe it never fully arrives, really. But I do think we're witnessing the beginning of one of the biggest shifts humanity has ever experienced. And I think most people are underestimating just how profound it could be. Because this isn't just a story about technology. You know, it's a story about value, exchange, purpose, freedom, and ultimately what happens when survival is no longer the main objective. Because if machines eventually solve production, then for the first time in history, the question starts to not be, how do I make a living? It becomes, how do I live? So I think this is a really, really important topic. I would love to open a conversation about this in the comments below. I don't want the comment section filled with buy Grok and buy Bitcoin and all these scammy comments. Come on, get a grip. You know, this is more important. All those scammers typing in scammy comments, get a grip. You know, what are you doing? Sort your life out. Let's have a serious conversation about what's happening here so that we can all actually make something and make a good life. Anyway, thanks for watching. Until next time, check out the other videos on the channel and I'll see you then.